The Sleepless Princess. The galaxy remembered her name, but not for her beauty, not for her crown, but for her curse. She was the princess who could not sleep. Night after night, year after year, her eyes stayed open, heavy with exhaustion, yet never closing. Doctors from her own planet tried every treatment. Alien healers from distant worlds came with their strange rituals. Machines hummed and whispered around her bed, but nothing worked. Her body weakened, her skin grew pale, her mind wandered between reality and dream, yet sleep never came. Her empire began to worry, because a sleepless princess meant a fragile ruler, and a fragile ruler meant enemies waiting in the dark. The palace was full of whispers. Some said the gods had cursed her. Others said she carried the burden of her ancestors, a secret shame hidden in royal blood. Her father, the king, was a proud man, but even he could not hide his fear when he saw his daughter shaking at dawn, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling, unable to walk without servants by her side. He ordered the royal guard to bring every possible cure from every corner of the stars. But still, the nights stretched endless for her. The princess herself tried to stay strong, but deep inside, she felt trapped. Every evening, when the sun set and the palace lights dimmed, she knew another long torture awaited. She would lie on the grand bed, silk sheets around her, golden curtains falling heavy, but none of it brought peace. She watched the stars outside her window, envying the silence of the sleeping world. Sometimes she wondered if death would be the only true rest she would ever find. Then came the prophecy. It was an old legend whispered by an ancient oracle, written in forgotten scrolls. It said, "The restless one shall find rest only when a heart not of her world lies beside her." The court laughed at this, calling it a fairy tale, but the princess clung to it, desperate for hope. She told herself that maybe somewhere across the stars, there existed someone who carried the cure without even knowing it. Fate moved on the battlefield. Far away, beyond her palace walls, two armies clashed in endless war. Among the prisoners taken was a man unlike the others, his body wounded, his spirit unbroken. He was human. To most aliens, humans were simple creatures, short-lived, fragile, unimportant. But to the prophecy, this human was everything. When the news reached the palace that a strange prisoner had been captured, the princess asked to see him. The court protested, saying it was beneath her to meet a common soldier, but she insisted. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless years, her body weak, but her voice carried authority. The guards finally brought the human into the golden hall, his wrists bound, his steps heavy, but his gaze steady. The princess looked at him, and in that moment something changed. It was small, like the first breath after drowning, like the first spark in darkness. Her heart slowed, her racing mind calmed, and for the first time in years, she felt the shadow of sleep tugging at her. She blinked in confusion, her hand gripping the armrest of her throne. The court gasped as color returned faintly to her pale cheeks. She asked the human simple questions. What was his name? Where was he from? Why was he fighting? He answered in plain words, words without the flowery lies of nobles, words without fear. And those words felt heavier than any medicine she had ever taken. The princess dismissed the court that day, keeping the human under her watch. She did not know why, but she could not let him go. That night, when she returned to her chambers, something strange happened. The moment she remembered his face, her eyes grew heavy. She sat on her bed, her heart beating fast with fear, wondering if the impossible was happening. And then, for the first time in her life, the princess drifted into a shallow sleep. It lasted only minutes, but it was real, and when she woke, tears filled her eyes. She realized then that the prophecy might be true. The human was not just a prisoner, not just a stranger from another world. He was her only chance at salvation. But salvation in the palace was dangerous, because if the court discovered that her life depended on him, they would never allow it. For them, he was a threat, a weakness, and perhaps even a weapon to be used against her. The princess sat in the silent chamber, her trembling hands clutching the sheets, her mind racing. For the first time in years, hope had entered her heart, but with hope came fear. If one human could bring her peace, what would the galaxy do to take him away? A human in the palace. The palace had never seen such a creature before. Servants whispered as the guards dragged him through the long silver halls, his boots scraping against marble floors that had never known the dirt of war. He was tall compared to most aliens there, his shoulders broad though wounded, his skin marked with scars, and his eyes sharp like fire. The nobles sneered, calling him a beast from a primitive world, a soldier with no value. Yet they still stared with curiosity, for no human had ever been brought into the royal court. The princess sat on her throne, her fragile body hidden behind layers of silk, her crown heavy against her weary head. Her eyes were half open, heavy from endless nights without rest. But when the human was forced to kneel before her, something strange stirred inside her. It was not love, not yet. It was not even trust. It was something simpler, a silence, a quiet calmness that slipped into her heart like a secret. For the first time in years, her breath did not shake. The court waited for her judgment. "Why should such a creature be brought before me?" One noble muttered, "He belongs in the cells, not in the palace." But the princess raised her hand, her voice soft yet firm. "Leave him," she commanded. "I will speak to him alone." The guards hesitated. The nobles exchanged nervous glances. But her word was law, and slowly the hall emptied until only the princess and the human remained. He looked up at her, his wrists still bound in chains, his face smeared with dust and blood, yet his gaze was steady. The princess leaned forward, studying him, her voice almost trembling as she spoke. "What are you called?" "Daniel," he answered simply, his voice low and rough. The sound of it struck her deeper than she expected, plain, unpolished, yet real. No alien healer had ever spoken to her like that. No noble dared to speak with such directness. And that honesty was more powerful than all the medicines of the galaxy. She asked him more questions, and he answered each with the same steady tone. Where was his home? Why did he fight? What did he believe in? And though his words were simple, they carried a weight. The princess felt her chest rise and fall in rhythm with his voice, her mind slowing, her exhaustion softening. It was as if his presence itself was medicine, invisible yet undeniable. That night, she ordered something that shocked the entire palace. "The human will not be sent to the dungeons," she declared. "He will remain under my protection." The king's advisors objected, whispering that this was madness, that allowing a foreign soldier to stay so close to the throne was dangerous. But the princess's eyes, though heavy with sleeplessness, burned with a light no one had seen in years. And so the human was placed in a chamber close to hers, guarded but alive, a decision that would soon change everything. The palace grew restless. Everywhere, whispers spread like fire. Some claimed the princess had fallen under a spell. Others said the human carried poison in his blood. A few began to fear the prophecy, realizing that perhaps it was not just a story. If a simple human could bring peace to their cursed princess, what power would he hold over her kingdom? That night, the princess lay awake as always, her body weak, her mind racing. Yet she noticed something strange. Through the walls, faint and steady, she could hear his breathing in the chamber beside hers. It was calm, slow, natural, and for reasons she could not explain, her own breath began to follow its rhythm. Her eyes grew heavier, and though sleep still resisted, she felt herself drifting closer than she had in years. But fear struck her heart. If anyone discovered that her fragile rest was tied to him, they would take him away. They would see him not as a cure, but as a threat to their control. The princess knew the court was dangerous, filled with greedy eyes waiting for a chance to claim the throne. If the human was truly her only hope, then she had to protect him, even if it meant hiding her secret from her own blood. Far away, in his chamber, Daniel sat awake, his wounds aching, his mind confused. He did not understand why he was kept alive, why this fragile princess had spared him. All he knew was that her eyes, though filled with exhaustion, had carried something no battlefield ever had: trust. And though he did not yet realize it, his life had already been tied to hers, a bond stronger than chains, stronger than fear. The palace thought him a prisoner, but in truth, he had already become something else: a cure, a shield, and perhaps, in time, something even greater. The night of silence. The palace grew quiet as the twin moons rose above the silver towers. Servants hurried to extinguish the lights. Guards took their positions, and the halls echoed only with the faint sound of armored footsteps. But in the royal chamber, silence felt heavier than stone. The princess sat on the edge of her grand bed, her hands trembling as they pressed against her knees, her body begging for rest, yet refusing to surrender. It was the same every night, the same endless torture. Yet tonight was different because tonight, only a wall separated her from the human. She closed her eyes and listened. Through the silence, she could hear it, steady, calm, unbroken. The sound of his breathing. At first, it was faint, almost drowned by the hum of the palace machines. But the longer she focused, the louder it became. Her chest began to rise and fall with his rhythm. Her heart slowed, and for the first time, her body felt safe. It was strange, frightening even, but it was real. Her eyelids grew heavy, and before she knew it, she drifted into something she had not known for years: true sleep. When the servants entered at dawn, they froze in shock. The princess was still, her face soft, her lips curved in the faintest trace of peace. No healer had ever brought this to her, no machine, no ritual, yet a human's presence had done it without effort. The news spread quickly through the palace, though the princess tried to silence it. But servants whispered in corners, guards exchanged nervous glances, and the court began to murmur. The cursed princess had slept, and it was because of him. That evening, she summoned him again. He entered the chamber under heavy guard, his wrists still bound, though the chains felt weaker now than before. The princess dismissed the others, her eyes locked on his. "Last night," she said softly, her voice carrying both wonder and fear, "I slept." The human tilted his head, confused. "Because of me?" he asked. Her lips trembled before she nodded. "Yes, because of you." The human said nothing at first. On the battlefield, he had been a soldier, a weapon, a survivor. But never had anyone told him that his mere presence could save a life. He did not understand it, yet he could not deny the truth in her eyes. The princess stepped closer, her weak frame shaking with the effort. "I need you near," she whispered, "not as a prisoner, but as something else." Her words hung in the air, daring, dangerous, yet filled with desperation. That night, she gave an order that shook the palace to its core. The human would stay in her chamber, not behind walls, not guarded in chains, but beside her. The king's advisors erupted in protest, declaring it madness, treason against their traditions. But the princess silenced them with a single command, her voice sharper than it had been in years. "Leave," she said, and the fire in her tone left no room for defiance. So the human was brought into her chamber, his chains removed for the first time since capture. The bed was wide, lined with gold and silk, yet he did not lie on it. Instead, he sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, his arms folded as if guarding her from shadows. The princess lay above, her eyes locked on him, her heart racing faster than any battlefield drum. And then, slowly, her breath matches again. Her body relaxed, her eyes fluttered shut, and within moments, the impossible happened once more. She slept, not minutes this time, but hours, deep and unbroken. When she awoke at dawn, sunlight spilling across the chamber, tears ran down her cheeks. She whispered softly, "I dreamed." Her voice shook as she looked at him, still awake, still watching like a silent guardian. "No one will believe this," she said, half in fear, half in wonder. The human only shrugged, his voice calm. Then let be our secret. But secrets never lasted in a palace built on whispers. Already, the nobles plotted. Already, jealous eyes turned toward the human. If he could cure the princess, he could also control her, and if he controlled her, he controlled the throne. Danger had entered the royal walls, quiet and invisible, but sharp as any blade. That night, as the princess closed her eyes beside the human once more, she felt peace. But beyond the chamber doors, the seeds of betrayal had already begun to grow, and soon, both she and the human would learn that the cure she had found carried a price far greater than she imagined. Whispers in the court. The palace was no longer silent. What had once been endless halls of cold stone now buzzed with whispers, shadows moving from ear to ear, rumor to rumor. The princess had slept, and everyone knew why. They said the human was a spellbinder, a curse in the shape of a man. Others claimed he was no ordinary prisoner, but a hidden weapon from the enemy. Some even whispered the unthinkable, that the princess herself had fallen under his charm. At the morning council, the king sat upon his throne, his fists tight against the armrests, his face carved with anger. The court is filled with lies, he thundered. My daughter's health is no concern of the rabble. But even he could not silence the truth that spread like wildfire. For years, no healer could cure her, and yet this one man, this human, had brought her peace. Peace that the king could not provide, peace that no empire of ships or armies could deliver. The nobles shifted uncomfortably in their golden seats. They saw danger, for if the princess depended on the human, then the human held power over the royal line. And power was something they would never allow to slip into foreign hands. Already, they began to plot in silence, their eyes sharp as knives. Meanwhile, the princess herself sat in her private garden, weak sunlight falling across her pale face. She leaned against a carved stone bench, her eyes half closed, but not from exhaustion, from something else. For the first time in years, she had woken with strength in her body. Her hand no longer trembled as she lifted the cup of water. Her breath no longer rattled in her chest. And she knew it was because of him, the human, Daniel. He stood a few steps away, still watched by guards, though the chains were gone now. He looked out of place among the blossoms and glowing vines, his body scarred, his uniform torn, yet there was a strange harmony in his stillness. The princess looked at him and whispered, almost to herself, "They will not understand." He turned to her, his eyes calm. "They do not need to." Her heart stilled at his words, simple yet powerful, words that carried no weight of politics, only truth. But outside the garden walls, the whispers grew louder. That evening, the nobles gathered in secret chambers, their jeweled hands clenching goblets of wine, their voices low and venomous. "If she continues to keep him near, he will become more than her cure," one hissed. "He will become her weakness," another growled. And weakness was something they could exploit. The king himself wrestled with doubt. In his heart, he wanted his daughter well. He wanted her strong again, but the thought of her life depending on an alien soldier filled him with unease. What if the prophecy was true? What if this human was meant to bind her fate, not heal it? And if so, would that fate belong to her people, or to him? That night, the princess called for Daniel once more. The guards obeyed reluctantly, their eyes burning with suspicion, but they dared not question their ruler. He entered quietly, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The princess looked at him, her voice softer than the rustling curtains. "Last night, I dreamed again," she said, "not of darkness, but of light, of walking freely under the sun." Her lips curved into a fragile smile, the first true smile her servants had ever seen. And Daniel, though he did not smile often, felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. The palace servants watched in silence as he stayed near her. And soon their silence became whispers, whispers became rumors, and rumors became poison. Some said the human was weaving spells in her sleep. Others said he planned to claim the throne through her weakness. The court no longer saw a cure. They saw a threat. And threats, in the world of power, were always removed. The princess did not know that while she rested peacefully for the first time in years, a plan was already forming in the shadows. Assassins, hidden hands, whispered deals. Her gift of sleep had awakened more than her own strength. It had awakened fear, envy, and greed. And though she had finally found hope, that hope would soon be tested by those who wanted it destroyed. The threat. The palace looked calm under the glow of the twin moons, but beneath the surface, danger moved like a snake in tall grass. The nobles had spoken enough, whispered enough, and now they began to act. To them, the human was not just a prisoner anymore. He was a crack in the throne, a shadow that could one day swallow the crown. And shadows, in their world, were meant to be erased. That night, as the princess rested with Daniel close by, two cloaked figures slipped silently through the halls. They were not ordinary thieves, but assassins loyal to gold, not to honor. Their blades dipped in poison strong enough to silence even the strongest warrior. The guards at the outer gates never saw them pass, their eyes blinded by bribes, their loyalty already sold. Step by step, the assassins moved closer to the royal chambers, their breath shallow, their hearts steady. Inside the chamber, the princess slept, her breath soft and steady. Daniel sat near the bed, not asleep, never asleep, his soldier's instincts sharp even in captivity. He had lived through war, through ambushes and forests, through nights when silence meant death. And he knew the difference between peace and danger. Tonight, the silence felt wrong. His eyes narrowed as he stood, muscles tense, his ears catching the faintest scrape of metal against stone outside the door. The princess stirred, sensing his movement. "What is it?" she whispered, still half dreaming. Daniel raised a hand to silence her, his voice low and firm. "Stay quiet." The door creaked, just slightly, enough to reveal a shadow, slipping inside, then another. The assassins moved like hunters, their blades gleaming faintly in the moonlight. But before they could take another step, Daniel was already moving. With the speed of a soldier who had survived countless battles, he grabbed a heavy vase from a table and hurled it against the wall, the crash echoing like thunder. The princess gasped, the guards outside shouted, and in that split second of confusion, Daniel lunged. He tackled the first assassin, twisting the man's wrist until the poisoned blade clattered to the floor. The second rushed at him, silent and deadly, but Daniel rolled across the ground, pulling the fallen dagger into his own hand. Steel met steel, sparks flying in the moonlit chamber. The sound of clashing echoed louder than the princess's own heartbeat. She clutched her sheets, terrified yet unable to look away. The guards burst through the door at last, but too late. One assassin lay bleeding on a marble floor, the other pinned under Daniel's weight, the human's blade pressed against his throat. The guards froze, unsure whether to strike at the human or the intruder. "Fools!" Daniel barked, his voice raw. "They came for her, not for me." The princess's trembling voice followed, sharp and commanding. "Stand down," she ordered. "He saved me." The assassins were dragged away, their hoods torn back to reveal familiar faces. They were not strangers, not spies from distant lands, but men who served within the court itself. The revelation spread like fire. Traitors had been walking inside the palace all along. The nobles who plotted in secret clenched their teeth in rage, their plan broken, their weapon exposed. But even in failure, their hatred of the human grew. Now he was no longer just her cure. He was her protector, her shield, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The king arrived moments later, his face pale with shock as he looked at the wreckage of his daughter's chamber. The sight of the human standing strong, his chest heaving, the blood of assassins at his feet, filled the king with both gratitude and fear. For the first time, he realized what the nobles already feared. If the princess's life depended on this man, then so did the future of the empire. That night, the princess clung to Daniel's arm, her eyes wide with unspoken terror. Without him, she would have been gone, Her life ended before she ever found peace. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You are not my prisoner anymore." Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "Then what am I?" The princess lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning with a faint blush even in the shadows. "My protector," she said softly, "my only protector." But outside, in the silent corners of the palace, more whispers rose, sharper and darker than before. The nobles would not stop. The assassins were only the first strike. The human had saved her once, but greater storms were already gathering. And soon, both of them would have to face the truth. His presence had changed not only the princess, but the fate of the entire empire. The choice. The palace no longer felt safe. After the night of the assassins, every shadow seemed to hold a blade. Every whisper carried poison. The princess knew the court would not stop. They would keep trying until either the human was gone, or she was. But the thought of losing him filled her with more fear than death itself. The council gathered the next morning, their golden robes flowing like rivers of pride, their voices sharp as steel. They demanded answers, demanded control, demanded that the human be removed at once. "He is a danger," one cried. "He is a soldier of the enemy. He clouds her judgment," another hissed. "Already she refuses our advice. Already she breaks tradition." Their voices rose louder, bouncing against the tall marble walls, until the hall was filled with chaos. The king raised his hand, silencing them. His face was carved with weariness, his eyes dark with conflict. He looked at his daughter, his voice low. "My child," he said, "I have given you everything. I have protected you from the curse, from enemies, from lies. But this human, he is not ours, he is not of us. Tell me, are you truly bound to him?" The princess stood, her thin frame trembling, yet her voice cut through the silence like fire. "Yes," she said, "I am." Gasps filled the hall, nobles clutching their robes in shock. The king's eyes widened, a storm raging behind them. "Do you understand what you say?" he demanded. "You speak of choosing him over your own blood, over your own throne." The princess's heart raced, her hands cold, yet her voice did not falter. "For years I have lived as a shadow, sleepless, broken, waiting for death," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and strength. "You could not cure me. Your healers could not save me. Your machines could not help me. But he, this human, by simply existing near me, gave me back my life. Without him, I am nothing. Without him, I will fall again into darkness." The court erupted in outrage, voices clashing. "She has lost her mind," one shouted. "She is bewitched," cried another. The king's advisors stepped forward, their faces grim. "Majesty," one said coldly, "if she continues down this path, the people will see her as weak. They will see her as controlled by an outsider, and the throne itself will lose all honor." The king looked at his daughter with sorrow, then turned to the human. Daniel stood silently by her side, his hands at his sides, his body tense, but his eyes steady. He did not speak. He did not beg. He only looked back at the king with the same unbroken fire that had carried him through war. And in that silence, the court saw something dangerous. Not a prisoner, not a cure, but a rival. Finally, the king's voice rang out, sharp and final. "Then you must choose," he said, his hand trembling. "The human or your throne?" The chamber froze, all eyes on the princess. She felt her knees weaken, her throat dry, but she lifted her head. She looked at Daniel, then at her father, then at the nobles whose eyes burned with hatred. And then she spoke, her voice steady. "I choose him." The hall shook with outrage, gasps, curses, shouts of betrayal. The king's face turned pale with fury, his fists slamming against the armrest of his throne. "Do you know what you have done?" he roared. "You would cast aside your blood, your empire, your crown for him." Tears burned in the princess's eyes, but her voice did not break. "If I lose him, I lose myself," she whispered, "and an empty throne is better than a hollow life." The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, unsure if they were meant to defend the throne or the princess. The nobles demanded her removal, demanded her punishment, demanded her silence. But the princess stepped closer to Daniel, her fragile body standing like a wall of steel before him. "If he leaves, I will go with him," she declared, her voice echoing through the hall. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Daniel looked at her then, truly looked. He had been her protector, her shield, her cure, but he had never thought he would be her choice. And in that moment, as the hall turned against her, he realized something he had never admitted even to himself. He could not let her face this storm alone. The king's face was dark with rage, the nobles' whispers twisted with venom. The palace itself trembled under the weight of her words. But the choice had been made, and choices had consequences. That night, as the princess sat in her chamber, her hand trembling in Daniel's, she whispered softly, "They will never forgive me." Daniel's voice was steady, unshaken. "Then let them try," he said, "for I will not leave your side." And outside, beyond the palace walls, warships gathered in the dark skies, enemies watching closely. For the choice of one princess had just changed the fate of an empire. The eternal rest. The skies above the empire darkened. From a horizon, warships appeared, their black hulls blocking out the stars, their weapons glowing like fire waiting to be unleashed. Enemies had heard the rumors, the sleepless princess cured by a human, the prophecy reborn, and they believed this was the moment to strike. If the throne was weak, if the princess was divided from her court, then the empire was ripe for conquest. The palace shook with alarms, soldiers rushing through the halls, banners torn by sudden winds of war. The king stood at the highest tower, his fists trembling as he looked at the endless fleet outside his world. For the first time, he saw what he had feared most. His daughter's choice had not only broken his court, it had drawn the attention of the galaxy. And now, the survival of his empire rested in the hands of the very man he wished to cast away. Inside the royal chamber, the princess clung to Daniel's arm, her voice shaking. "They come for me," she whispered. "They come for us." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady, his jaw set. "Then let them come," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "I have faced death 1,000 times, and I will face it again for you." The palace guards, still torn between loyalty to crown and fear of the nobles, hesitated. But when the first explosion struck the outer walls, shaking the marble floors, even they knew the truth. The empire needed more than tradition now. It needed survival. And survival came from a man who had already protected their princess once before. The enemy forces descended, breaking through defenses, their armored soldiers flooding the courtyards like a wave of steel. The air burned with fire, screams echoed, blades clashed. And in the middle of it all, Daniel stood, no longer chained, no longer a prisoner, but a warrior reborn. The princess watched from the balcony, her heart pounding as she saw him fight, his body moving with the precision of a soldier who had survived countless battles. Every strike, every step, every breath, he fought not for himself, but for her. The court, seeing the impossible, began to shift. Where they once whispered poison, now they saw truth. The human was not weakness, he was strength. And the princess, though fragile in body, had shown greater courage than any of them. Her voice rang across the palace walls, clear and unshaken. "Stand with him," she cried, "stand with us." And slowly, one by one, the guards and soldiers rallied, their fear broken, their loyalty restored. The battle raged through the night. By dawn, the enemy ships burned in the sky, their armies broken, their leaders slain. The human, bloodied and scarred, stood upon the ruined courtyard, his chest heaving, but his spirit unbroken. The princess rushed to him, her pale hands reaching to hold his face, her tears falling freely. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not only me, but all of us." Daniel shook his head, his voice low. "No, princess," he said, You saved yourself, you chose, and that choice gave you strength. In the days that followed, the court no longer dared to whisper against him. The people of the empire looked upon their princess and saw not a cursed ruler, but a queen reborn. They saw the human at her side and did not see weakness, but a shield stronger than any army. The prophecy had come true, but not in the way they had expected. It was not just sleep she had found, but peace, not just rest, but hope. That night, as the palace lay quiet once more, the princess sat beside Daniel, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the night, not afraid of the silence, not afraid of the darkness. She closed her eyes, and sleep came easily, gently, as if it had always belonged to her. And when she dreamed not of curses or chains, but of freedom, of stars, of walking hand in hand with him under a sky that no longer felt so heavy. The galaxy would remember her story, the alien princess who could not sleep until a human lay beside her. But to her, it was never about prophecy, never about fate, never about power. It was about finding rest in a world that had only given her torment. It was about finding trust in someone who asked for nothing in return. It was about finally closing her eyes and knowing that when she opened them again, she would never be alone. And so, the sleepless princess found her eternal rest, not in death, not in surrender, but in the arms of the one no one ever expected, a human